wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arcanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm Chris James, your host. If you had tuned in a few minutes early and were listening to that enthralling episode about the Dyatlov Pass, and you want to hear the rest of the show, you can find it in our archives at strangethings.podomatic.com, and so you won't miss the rest of the story. Today, we're going to be talking about the mysteries of the Grand Canyon. This will be season number 2, episode 27. I believe it's July 7th, 2007. Before we get talking about the Grand Canyon, correction. Well, we are talking about the Grand Canyon. Have you been to the Grand Canyon? If not, what are you waiting for? I know lots of people say they saw pictures of the canyon, and that's good enough. That's kind of like saying you saw a picture of a pizza one time, and that's all you need. Seeing it is so much more impressive. Impressive isn't good enough. We stood on the edge of the cliff, and we couldn't take our eyes off the view. If not for my needing coffee and the wind was blowing a sultry 10 degrees in January, we might have stayed there all day. We do plan to go back just as soon as we can get going in that direction. Take the RV and spend a lot more time seeing one of the greatest wonders of the world, but not in January. I made 2 discoveries that day. One, you have to see the canyon to get any kind of an idea on how spectacular it is. And 2, transition glasses go completely black when exposed to freezing weather. We walked into the store to get the coffee, and I couldn't see a thing. Before we get to talking about the canyon, here's just a little something I stumbled on while looking for articles on the canyon. Back in 1855, the state of Mississippi wanted to do something with all those folks considered to be too crazy to be allowed out in public. Some were just a bit off in the head, while others could be considered a danger to the public. So the Mississippi State Lunatic Asylum was opened. If you listened to the show called Asylums of Death back in June 10th, you'll have heard how some folks used the local state hospital as a dumping ground for unwanted relatives. Say you had 10 kids and one of them was a handful, acting like most kids do today. What could you do? Too many mouths to feed. The boy won't listen. He's just one too many. Well, you take him over to the state hospital. They'll take good care of him. That's what hospitals do. Well, so more than one young kid was dropped off at the state-run hospital for their own good. No one ever bothered to go back and ask, how's Junior doing? Is he getting enough to eat? No, once the son or the daughter or the grandfather or whoever had been abandoned to the care of the state, that was it. One thing about most hospitals, people die there, especially those run by the state. There were hundreds of patients all crowded together, and don't you know, 1 or 2 brought some incurable disease in with them. If only one patient had TB, soon dozens would be infected. And then there was also a yellow fever outbreak. No one knew back then you had to get rid of the mosquitoes or you'd wind up a breeding ground for nastiness. On occasion, there would be an outbreak of the flu. Now, no one actually dies from the flu. You die from pneumonia, which comes from not taking care of yourself once you do have the flu. The patients in the Mississippi State Asylum were not given very good care while they were almost healthy, let alone once they got sick. So, the patients would develop pneumonia, which also went untreated, and this would usually lead to many deaths. It appears that most patients had a life expectancy of about 13 months. In just over 1 year, most patients were dead and buried. With such a turnover, the hospital had their own graveyard. From 1855 up until the place closed in 1935, somewhere around 35,000 people were placed in the unloving care of the people running this hospital of death. Few, if any, ever escaped with their lives. Disease wasn't the only thing killing off patients. Nutrition wasn't considered back then. You ate what was placed in front of you, or you went hungry. The folks in charge of buying and preparing food for the patients didn't worry about freshness or little things like washing their hands. Many patients were suffering from malnutrition long before acquiring some nasty disease that would end their lives. And keep in mind, there were people in the hospital who enjoyed being mean. The kind of people that, had they been out in public, would have been considered serial killers today. Patients weren't segregated according to just how crazy they were. They were allowed to mingle amongst each other, and I'm sure there were several unsolved murders that nobody ever bothered to look into. So, most patients wound up being interred in the hospital cemetery in the cheapest coffins available. Just a wooden box placed in the ground, not even so much as a head marker. When the hospital closed in 1935, the cemetery was forgotten. Not having any upkeep, the grounds went to weed and everything was overgrown. Time staggered on and bodies that were buried soon became forgotten, at least by the state. Some families didn't have the means to pick up the deceased and take the body to a local graveyard. Some never even learned that their relatives had died. The land was still owned by the state of Mississippi. As time went by and the town of Whitfield became a part of Jackson, Mississippi, the land was needed for other developments. The University of Mississippi Medical Center was being expanded back in 2012. As the foundation was being dug, they discovered several graves they didn't expect to find. Then, with more building, more graves began to turn up. They couldn't turn over a shovel of dirt without finding an old body. When ground-penetrating radar was brought in to see how many graves were there with the intentions of removing the graves to another cemetery, they found something in the neighborhood of 7,000 bodies. Now, the state of Mississippi is in a bit of a quandary. They say it will cost $21 million to dig up, transport, and rebury all of those bodies found so far. And keep in mind, they only spotted that many using radar. Others will turn up once the digging really begins. Over the years, more than one graveyard was plowed down and buildings put on top of it. Buildings that were put on top of somebody's relatives. So, will the state of Mississippi hand over the money to remove all of these bodies, or just continue with the development? Hospitals are plagued by spirits as it is. Building on top of an old graveyard will probably make matters even worse. When me and my wife are visiting my nephew John up in Virginia, we always stay at the Chantilly RV Park, a very nice place. Right next to the main road is a small cluster of trees. Back in the trees is a square of ground fenced off with a chain. It turns out this is an old cemetery. The slaves that used to toil the fields way, way back had been buried there. Each time we stop in, I go by the cemetery and I pay my respects. I tell the spirits to be nice and not to scare my wife so we can enjoy our visit. And so far, she hasn't seen anything scary, just some dark shadows flighting about through the trees. We're going to take a break here, play a couple of commercials, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. And now for the Grand Canyon Mysteries. Back in 1909, there was an article in the Phoenix Gazette stating a professor from the Smithsonian had found a fabulous treasure hidden in the canyon. Professor S.A. Jordan and explorer G.E. Kincaid were exploring the Grand Canyon as a part of their quest for historic artifacts. The articles that I've read aren't clear as to whether they were exploring together or they simply wound up working together. We'll just say that they were together the whole time. They had clomb up and down the canyon after spotting what had looked like pictographs painted on the side of one of the cliffs. If you've never been hiking in the canyon, it gets hot down there, very hot. Then as the sun goes down, the wind picks up, causing extreme temperature changes. This is not the place to be if you're not in good shape. Professor Jordan saw a cave opening, and the pair worked their way up to it. As they drew closer, they could see the opening really looked man-made. It was squared off, and it had been reinforced with rocks stacked up on either side of the opening. Thinking this was some kind of an ancient Indian construction, they ventured inside. The Havasupai people are an American Indian tribe who have lived in the Grand Canyon for at least the past 800 years. Havasu means blue-green water, and Pai means people, thus the name Lake Havasu. The Hualapai, the people of the tall pines, have also lived in and around the Grand Canyon for hundreds of years. In the past, the Hualapai were hunter-gatherers, inhabiting an expanse of more than 5 million acres, stretching from the Grand Canyon south to Santa Maria River and from the Black Mountains east to the San Francisco Peaks. The Navajo are another tribe with ties to the canyon area. So the professor assumed this cave had been used by one of these tribes, and he was hoping to find some relics to actually steal and take back to the museum. Let's face it, most of the items on display in museums were taken from Indian land without so much as a thank you. If you remove things from a European grave, you're a grave robber. If you remove things from an Indian grave, you're an archaeologist. Jordan and Kincaid followed the passage deep inside the canyon wall. They could already taste the joy of a successful mission. Professor Jordan thought his colleagues would be impressed, and this would probably lead to a full position on the staff of the Smithsonian. Kincaid was counting the money he would have selling off these Indian relics. After walking a ways, the pair came to a big room. The walls were filled with urns and vases, all sparkling gold. The walls, that weren't hidden behind these valuable containers, were covered with writing. Jordan looked at the inscriptions, thinking this would be some ancient Indian writing. What he saw looked more like hieroglyphics from Egypt. He at first just decided the inscriptions only looked Egyptian. The poor light from his torch and the dark, cold conditions must be playing tricks with him. Jordan and Kincaid ventured farther into the tunnel complex. They found a central hub where dozens of tunnels led off in other directions. They also found more evidence that this was no native Indian construction. All the treasures found looked just like Egyptian artifacts. There were also mummies, wooden sarcophagi with human remains that had been embalmed inside. Embalming was something the Indians never did. Everything they found said this was no Indian gravesite, but an Egyptian tomb. Having spent the day looking and realizing it was time to bring in the excavation team, they left the tunnel and headed back to town where Jordan could contact his bosses. I would love to have been able to listen in to that conversation. Phones back then were far from what we have today. Once Jordan had convinced his bosses at the Smithsonian he wasn't suffering from heat exhaustion, plans were made to remove all the treasures that he had found. The local newspaper reported 180 trucks had to be loaded with all the bizarre and exciting things discovered in this ancient tunnel. The trucks all drove away en route to Washington and the museum there. Once the trucks were safely unloaded, all the artifacts were squirreled away in some secure vault, never to be seen by the rest of the world. Today, if you call the Smithsonian and ask about the Egyptian treasures removed from the Grand Canyon, they'll tell you it never happened. No, the Egyptians could never have sailed across the Atlantic. It was impossible. They all thought the world was flat and they'd sail off the edge. This is the official stance of the folks in charge. These scientists are trying to convince us the Egyptians and the Phoenicians, who sailed all over the Mediterranean, could never have made it across the Atlantic Ocean. They don't believe it, so therefore it never happened. And why would the folks in charge be so dead set against ever telling us the truth? Let's think about it. Say you're in charge of some government agency and you've been saying those pesky Indians were just a bunch of savages. They lived in teepees and they hunted for food. Ah, but there's lots of examples of Indian construction all over the Southwest. So you send out some men out to have a look at these constructions and you make sure they go away. This would make it more acceptable to bulldoze our way across the plains and take land from those savages. Hundreds of sites were destroyed by these so-called archaeologists as a way of making the original inhabitants look less worthy of keeping what they had. Once the deed had been done, no one would ever want to admit the original intent of the exploration was to do away with history and not to preserve it. It's a little something called manifest destiny, which was invented by John O'Sullivan in 1845. 1872 to 1873, the American bison were killed by the thousands. They are bison, not buffalo. Buffalo live in Africa. Bison are in the United States. Everyone thinks those are buffalo because of that song. Those big shaggy creatures you'll still find in a few locations are bison. Ever wonder why they were killed, as if someone were trying to eradicate them? How about the government had realized the bison were a vital part of the Indian diet? Kill off the bison, kill off the Indians. This ran hand in hand with all those blankets contaminated with smallpox and all the tribes being herded onto land not fit to live on. It was all a part of our manifest destiny to take land formerly belonging to others. I can say, as far as I know from my family history, we had nothing to do with stealing anyone's land. That's why we don't have any land today. As for Professor Jordan and Kincaid, the Smithsonian will deny any knowledge of them. However, if you dig down deep enough, you can still find references to the team. Nothing historically significant, but it still shows they did work for the Smithsonian despite their denials. History says they went north into Alaska looking for more ill-gotten gains, and that was their last known destination. The Hopi Indians have a legend that says, way back when, a young member of the tribe wandered down an unused trail inside the canyon. At some point along the trail, he found a cave. Inside were hundreds of copper and gold containers. There were statues and carvings showing men dressed in clothing unlike anything found in the area. Metal helmets and shields, swords and spears. And there was an idol that showed a man sitting cross-legged, holding a flower in each hand, kind of like a Buddha. It sounds as if this young man had found the same cave as Jordan and Kincaid, or at least a small part of it. Having no use for these items, and perhaps believing they were some form of sacred site, the young man left, leaving everything where he had found them. There's still a full front page article from the Phoenix Gazette from April 5th, 1909. It tells the story of the discovery and a list of the artifacts removed and transported to the Smithsonian in Washington. The so-called experts will say this article was an April Fool's joke. Now ask yourself, was the newspaper lying, or could Washington be telling a lie? Mountain men, plying their trade in the canyon area, told tales of strange little men they saw near the cliff. These men sounded as if they spoke Welsh. When approached, these little men would scramble into their caves and pull the rocks into the opening. No one was ever able to speak to them. There have been stories from the past where explorers would bring along Welsh translators to speak with the local Indians. The locals spoke a language that was so similar to Welsh that the two were nearly identical. How is this possible? The story goes that in 1170, Prince Madoc sailed from Wales and made his way across the Atlantic. Once in the new land, he went about teaching his language to the locals. With time, the language spread throughout the population. Whether this story is true or not, the fact the Indians spoke a language almost identical to Welsh is a well-known fact. Around 1780, the search for Welsh Indians became focused on the Mandan people of North Dakota. They had light-colored skin as compared to their immediate neighbors. The next tribe over called them the White Indians. These light-skinned Indians spoke the Sioux language with Welsh words mixed in. They had originally come from the Mississippi River basin, and they had moved west. Unlike most Plains Indians, the Mandan lived in villages similar to what you'd expect to find in Europe. They were mostly farmers, and they raised livestock as opposed to being hunter-gatherers. For water travel, the Mandan built round wooden frame boats covered with animal skin, which is identical to boats found in Wales that are called coracles. These features quickly brought them to the attention of the European settlers, who conjectured that these might be the descendants of the Madoc's followers. Naturally, those folks with all the advanced learning will say it never happened. They'll haul out the old Columbus discovered America and that's that. What a lot of folks don't realize is back in the early mass immigration to the United States, thousands of people from Italy came looking for a better life. So many stayed in New York that the mayor wanted to make them feel right at home. This led to a Columbus Day celebration that became very popular. You'll find a lot more Italians than Welsh living in the New York City today. Getting back to the Grand Canyon once again, June 1956. Two airplanes, United Flight 718 and TWA Flight 1, took off from California. One was bound for Chicago and the other was heading to Kansas City. As the two planes flew east, they were both a good distance apart. Then, as the planes were passing over the Grand Canyon, they met, head-on, in midair. All 128 passengers and crew were killed, some having been ejected from the plane and falling to the ground 12,000 feet below. Others stayed with the disabled aircraft and were smashed to the rocks. No one knew anything had gone wrong at the time. It took days before anything even remotely like a rescue was launched. How did two planes, both going in the same direction and miles apart, suddenly run into each other? One theory is that the two planes had flown around a cloud, each going in an opposite direction. Then, as they rounded the cloud, they wound up coming at each other from opposite directions. This sounds a little bit screwy to me. There are plenty of theories, but no one knows what really happened. We do know that the FAA was formed because of this collision, and that's why we have the Federal Aviation Administration today. And once again, we're going to take a brief pause here, play a couple commercials. We'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Next time you're about to board an airplane or you're wondering why in the heck we've got all these people that are in charge of flying, it's because of that twin airplane crash over the Grand Canyon that we have all these rules today. People camping in the area near the crash site have told of seeing translucent images walking along in the dark. Sometimes there are what look like Indians either guiding or leading the ghostly images through the brush. Most folks report the ghosts were all heading towards the same area, a huge rock that sticks up from the river. It's called Sipapu, and at the top is a hole that's said to be the opening into the earth where the underground lies. The Hopi say through this hole the Spider Woman brought their people to the surface. Other people report hearing what sounds like someone calling for help. The sound is coming from the canyon, right where the two airplanes finally came to rest. The canyon where the crash took place is called Crash Canyon. You can still find chunks of airplanes laying on the rocks. Of the 128 fatalities, the recovery team removed as much human remains as they could. Parts were scattered all about the canyon, and there was no way of getting all of it. A mass grave was dug, and what had been found was buried. There's a memorial near the crash site on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. The weather can vary dramatically between the north rim and the south rim. Just because it's all a part of the same canyon doesn't mean the weather's the same. The north rim is considerably higher in elevation, and as a result is quite a bit cooler and more unpredictable, with the possibility of snow almost year-round. As a result, the north rim is only open to visitors in the late spring and summer, and part of the early fall. Lots of folks go to the Grand Canyon each year. It is one of the most impressive sights on Earth. You can drive the rim, stop here and there to have a closer look, or you can do as a lot of people do and take a hike. Now, unless you're in really good shape, I recommend walking along the edge and using your camera to get down to the sights at the bottom. But there's always those who decide to hike down to have a better look. There are plenty of trails you can take, all well marked and maintained. Just keep in mind the first half of the trip is all downhill. You're walking 1 mile down a winding trail that switches back and forth as you go. That's 1 mile straight down. The trail is actually almost 10 miles long. One trail, the Bright Angel, originates at the Grand Canyon Village on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. It descends 4,380 feet to the Colorado River. It has an average grade of 10% along its entire length. At trail's end, the river trail continues another 1.9 miles to the Bright Angel Campground and the Phantom Ranch. I'd like to know why it's called the Phantom Ranch, but I couldn't find any references to why it's named that. These two trails combined are the most common method used to access the Phantom Ranch by hikers and by mules. Hazards hikers encounter along the Bright Angel Trail, depending on the season, include dehydration, sudden rainstorms, flash flooding, loose footing, boot-packed ice. Boot-packed ice? Yes. As people walk over the snow, it gets compacted and it turns to ice, making it very slippery. Then you have rock falls, encounters with wildlife, and extreme heat. At the Colorado River, additional hazards include hypothermia due to the river's consistently cold temperatures, trauma due to collisions with boulders in the water, and drowning. And a lot of people get bit by squirrels. Don't feed the squirrels, especially by hand. Also, the trail is used by mules transporting people and gear to and from the bottom of the canyon. Although these mules are highly trained, the trail is narrow in some places, and care must be given to give the mules the right-of-way. The trail also has many switchbacks, and a bad fall can result in serious injuries. The squirrel bites at the plateau point are the leading cause of animal injuries to park visitors. Feeding the squirrels is prohibited and highly discouraged, so beware of the squirrels. Now, this is one of the well-maintained trails people use. The park employees maintain the trail and fix any bad spots so people don't get hurt too often. Then there are the backcountry trails. I can't even find any descriptions of them. Just take my word for it. They are for folks in the best shape who hike all the time and they know what they're doing. So, you make it to the bottom without getting killed or twisting an ankle or getting bit by a squirrel. You look around and you take a photo or two and, oh, look at the time. We'd best get going if we want to have dinner tonight. The trip up is also almost 10 miles, and now you're going uphill. Uphill the entire way. No smooth, easy walking to catch your breath. It's just what my wife would call a death march. I've taken her on a few. As you walk, if it's summertime, the temperature increases. It gets closer to the hottest part of the day, and you still have miles to go. Let's face it, we're all not in as good a shape as we wish we were. It's no wonder that each year people get in trouble hiking the canyon. If you're on one of the corridor trails, there will be people there to help you get to the top. Be sure to thank them profusely. They just saved your butt. Backcountry trails are not monitored. If you get in a bind, you're pretty much on your own unless somebody just happens to come by. Each year, people go missing. The park won't say how many. They don't keep those records around because they don't want a bad reputation. Just check out David Palautis' book, Missing 411. Just the thing to read while camping in one of our states or national parks. After a one-night stay at the National Park's Bright Angel Lodge, Drake Kramer, 21, of San Antonio, checked out on February 1st, 2015, and was reported missing the next day by his family. According to a statement from the National Park Service, he's still missing, and he was on one of the corridor trails. 2 people are missing from the backcountry area of the Grand Canyon National Park. Officials say A hiking party reported the two were last seen crossing Tapit's Creek below the confluence with Thunder River Saturday evening. When they crossed, they appeared to have lost their footing and were swept down the creek. The first hiker is a 62-year-old female, standing 5'5" and weighing 145 pounds, with blonde hair and green eyes. She was carrying a homemade blue backpack with maroon fleece, with hiking poles attached. The teenager is a 14-year-old male, standing 5'8" and weighing 105 pounds, with black hair. He was wearing a long-sleeve T-shirt with the word Columbia written on the sleeve. He was carrying a new sage green backpack. The National Park Service is currently conducting a search and rescue operation. If anyone has information into the disappearance, they would like you to give them a call. June 2nd, 2015. Morgan Heimer disappeared in the Grand Canyon. National Park Rangers began the search for the 22-year-old, but after 6 days they had not been able to find him. Heimer was one of the guides on the Grand Canyon river rafting trips. Even the guides get lost. John N. Anderson, 53, of Grapevine, Texas, died Saturday after falling from a 350-foot lip of the south rim near El Tovar Lodge, park rangers said. Witnesses reported seeing Anderson near a small rock wall that served as a barrier between visitors and the massive gorge. No one saw him fall, but the Grand Canyon Chief Ranger said Tuesday that he believed the man had been trying to rescue his hat, which had blown off in the wind. And knowing of all the dangers of hiking in the Grand Canyon, you decide to take a safe, easy way to see the canyon. You hop aboard one of the many helicopters or airplanes that fly in and around the canyon. True, this is the easiest way to see the sights. However, it is also the most dangerous. Surprisingly, more people die from air crashes than falls or heat or snake bites or drowning. There have been 65 fatal crashes of various aircraft in and around the canyon, accounting for 379 victims. And with all those people dying in and around the canyon, there are ghosts to go along with them. The Wailing Woman, or the Wandering Woman of the Grand Canyon, is said to have haunted the North Rim for nearly a century. Legend has it that the woman's husband and son went for a hike along the Transept Trail on the North Rim. The weather turned bad, and during a storm, the pair was swept off the edge of the cliff, falling to their deaths below. The woman was so overcome by grief, she spent the last days of her life wandering the trail looking for her family. When she couldn't find them, she hung herself in the lodge near the trail. Today, hikers on the trail between the lodge and the North Rim have reported hearing a woman wailing out in pain and sorrow. A few say they actually saw the woman. She appears as a semi-glowing image, dressed all in white, with small blue flowers, and she has a scarf wrapped around her head. The Tovar Hotel is located in the Grand Canyon. When the El Tovar Hotel opened at the end of the railroad line in the early 1900s, it was considered one of the most elegant hotels west of the Mississippi. Today, the El Tovar Hotel welcomes guests to the Grand Canyon National Park with as much care and hospitality as they did 100 years ago. It seems some guests simply refuse to leave. Right at the entrance to the parking lot is a grave. One story says this was one of the women who worked at the hotel back when it was first opened. She must have really loved the place because she is supposed to have been buried right outside. The other story goes it's the final resting place of a cowboy who died 1934. Which one is buried there? Nobody knows for sure, but guests report seeing a shadowy figure that moves from the entrance to the hotel and it glides over to where the grave is. Then the shadow just seems to vanish into the ground. People camping inside the canyon have reported seeing lights moving along the dark cliff in the middle of the night. As morning comes, the area where the lights have been seen have no trails anywhere near them. The lights appear to be moving along the face of the cliff. As more people have seen these ghost lights, stories have come up about the spirits of the dead out looking for some unknown place, or perhaps they're guiding other spirits to them. Surprisingly, there aren't any dinosaur fossils in the Grand Canyon. You'd think this would be the perfect place to find dinosaur fossils, a nice deep canyon cut deep into the Earth's surface. However, the rocks on the cliff of the canyon are far older than the dinosaur. The fossils you can find are simply prehistoric creatures such as corals, sponges, and trilobites. You can also find fossilized reptile footprints, but there aren't any fossilized reptile skeletons. So, if you're hiking along, if you do find a fossilized dinosaur, just ignore it. It's not real. The Havasupai Indians still live in the Grand Canyon. They live in Supai Village, which is only accessible by helicopter or horse and mule. You have to follow one of the trails that lead in and out of the canyon. Tourists can stay in the village and hike and camp in Havasu Canyon, which is part of the Grand Canyon. Today, the tribe, which consists of over 600 members, is governed by a democratically elected 7-member tribal council. The Supai boast 100% fluency in their native language and are one of the few tribes anywhere still inhabiting their original homeland. If you'd like to visit the Supai village, you can get more information at havasu-falls.com. And so we're going to take another break and play a couple commercials and drink some coffee. We'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Are you looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to look? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. They serve only the best coffee around. Not into coffee? They also have a wide selection of teas. It's a great place to meet friends or just spend time with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Trike. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. This next piece is something I found while looking for more on the Grand Canyon. I do believe there are craft flying around in the skies that didn't originate on our planet. Now, I don't know how accurate this report is, but it does sound interesting. It comes from Lisa Maracas, Flagstaff, Arizona. A team of experts called in to examine strange debris at the bottom of the Grand Canyon discovered the wreckage of a UFO that crashed a mind-boggling 4,000 years ago. The scientists, members of a highly secret joint military task force on UFOs, inspected the spherical craft and found it to be in pretty good condition, despite its rough landing and incredible age. The relic is made of an unknown metallic substance, and it emits low levels of radiation, according to leaks from highly placed sources. It was immediately removed from the site and is now in a secret location. I don't think this has to be Area 51. Wright-Patterson Air Base in Dayton, Ohio, was where most unknown technology went for examination and reverse engineering. And back to the story. My contact tells me, that's Lisa Maracas' contact, this craft is definitely of extraterrestrial origin and without a doubt carried a crew of 12 to 20 individuals, said Dr. Henry Lamont, a California-based astronomer who contracted this report after he was shown secret Air Force documents relating to the field. Carbon dating shows its crash landed at the base of the canyon around 2000 BC. Cabin features suggest that the crew members were much like humans, although significantly smaller. They apparently breathed oxygen. They guided their atom-powered craft with a magnetic steering system, and they carried a supply of food and water on board. According to reports filed by a scientific team, the spacecraft was lodged in limestone rubble at the base of the canyon, not far from an area called Comanche Point. A thorough inspection of the landing site, crash site, revealed that the spacecraft's occupants left their ship and they lived near it for a number of years after it crashed. The finding proves the existence of space alien colony on this planet nearly 3,500 years before Columbus. In other words, aliens discovered the United States and not Columbus or the Vikings. This impression is confirmed by Indian cave paintings made at the time the Air Force secret documents attest. The paintings found near the crash site show strange humanoid creatures with bulbous heads. Experts believe these creatures were the same aliens who arrived in the ancient UFO. The secret report said all traces of alien occupation disappeared within 50 years or so of the crash date. There is no indication of what might have happened to the extraterrestrials the document reveals. The ship is made of an extremely light metallic fiber, Dr. Lamont said. It measured about 50 feet across at its widest point, and it's 102 feet long. It's an incredible find, the latest in a series of artifacts collected secretly and hidden away in government UFO study centers. There's a lot of official concern about keeping this latest discovery a secret. They've been covering up the truth about alien contact for 50 years, and they're not going to stop now. They want to study this thing, but they want it only for themselves. Who knows what scientists might have learned if they'd shared this priceless find with the rest of the world. The source of this article is UFO BBS UFO crash. I find this an interesting article. It's not much different from the crash at Roswell, just a heck of a lot older. In 1982, a couple were hiking the edge of the canyon, looking for a nice place to sit and admire the view. They wanted something a bit more isolated than they had seen so far. One thing about going to any tourist site, there will be tourists. And when you see something really neat that you want to photograph, you just might get the back of somebody's head. Some folks get excited and they don't stop to think that there are others around. So this couple broke from the pack and worked their way into the brush so they could avoid the masses. They did find a nice quiet place to sit. As they sat admiring the view and the peace and quiet, they spotted a set of odd-looking clouds. These two clouds looked like a couple of flying saucers. Now, I know you can look at a cloud and see all kinds of things, but the couple said these two clouds never changed. They continued looking like flying saucers for a long time. They didn't move like the other clouds in the area, and when they did move, they went in the opposite direction of the real clouds. Now think about it. What better way to disguise a flying saucer than to make it look like a cloud? How many folks will take the time to sit and watch a cloud long enough to realize it's not a real cloud? If you have a passion for weird sightseeing travel destinations, you're sure to find yourself attracted to the Grand Canyon Caverns. This immensely popular location is situated on Route 66, that's the historical Route 66, in the northern region of Arizona. 1927, a young man named Walter Peck was on his way to a poker game. At one point in his journey, he tripped and he found that he had come exceptionally close to falling directly into a very deep hole. Later, he got his friends to lower him into this cave with a rope so he could have a look around and see where he almost died. He saw gold and diamonds, lots of gold, lots of diamonds. He got excited and ran for the local deed office, where he purchased the area around the cave with intentions of becoming quite rich. Well, it turns out what he thought was gold turned out to be iron oxide deposits. They sparkle like gold in the light from his lantern. All those diamonds? Crystal deposits. He had bought a huge, worthless cave and 800 acres of land around it as well. What to do? Walter fixed up a rig, and he began charging folks 25 cents to be lowered into the cave so they could have a look around for themselves. He never got rich, but he made enough money to live on for the rest of his life. Back in 1958, somebody got to wondering, how come the air in the cave blew up from below instead of down through the opening they had come in by? This led to others speculating as to where on earth, literally, the air was coming from. They set off a bunch of red smoke bombs inside the cave, and then they ran around looking for an opening feeding air into the subterranean site. They looked all over, but they could see no red smoke anywhere. 2 weeks later, they received a phone call from Supai Village in the Grand Canyon. There was red smoke coming out near the village. The Supai is 65 miles straight line from the cave. The air inside the Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon Cavern, is coming from the Grand Canyon. Because the air has to travel so far underground, and it passes over and under limestone, the air becomes so dry it is considered to be one of the driest caverns on Earth. This dry air causes mummification of things like a giant bear and a sloth. You can see these creatures still on display inside the cavern. Today there's an elevator so you don't have to ride a bucket into the darkness below. If you'd like to see the Grand Canyon Cavern, drive west on Interstate 40 past the entrance to the Grand Canyon. At Seligman, take the historical Route 66 and drive 22 miles west into Pica. And watch for the signs. There's also a hotel nearby and an RV park. So there you are. The Grand Canyon has just a few mysteries that need looking into. I hope you enjoyed the show. Tune in next Saturday for more strange things. We'll be talking about some strange things going on in the Everglades. And if you'd like to send us a message, we can be reached at strangethings@arcanasa.com. Our archives are at strangethings.podomatic.com. And we're also on iTunes and YouTube. Until next week, this is Chris James saying so long for now.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?